Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
Welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. This is your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, we're going to be talking about the Declaration of North America today, as well as the border crisis that exists and is going to get worse. You're going to want to stay tuned and hear from my guest. Simon Hankinson of the Heritage Foundation will be joining us. He's a senior research fellow for border security, or senior research fellow, border security and immigration center. His expertise lies there. And so anyway, I'll actually let Simon explain because he can break down his title much better than I can. But before I get to that, let me just remind you, please, to go to mypillow.com. You can click on the radio listener square to get all of the greatest and best deals that are available to you, including their 6-piece towel set right now that are selling for $39.98. Just enter the promo code Carl, my name, C-A-R-L, and you'll be privy to any of the deals available at mypillow.com. And of course, remember, you'll be supporting an American patriot in Mike Lindell. You'll be supporting American jobs, American manufacturing. And the towels really are great. I have them. I don't use anything else. That's the God's to honest truth. Also, 4patriots.com, our new sponsor, the number 4patriots.com. A food shortage could be coming, even in the U.S. Experts wrote as recently as July. A drought, inflation, and even new policies are pushing America's food supply near its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important than ever. So create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits. It's not ordinary food. So we're talking about food that lasts for 25 years. I always encourage people to make sure you have some of the regular things that you eat stocked up, a month's supply or so stocked up so that your stomach doesn't feel bad. But if you experience a major crisis, you're going to want to have this food supply from 4patriots.com. It's hand-packed, at a family-owned facility in the USA, giving jobs to over 200 Americans, by the way. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, and they stack easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. Meals are ready in less than 20 minutes. Add boiling water, simmer, and serve. So right now, if you go to 4Patriots, and again, that's the number 4patriots.com, use the promo code Carl for 10% off of your first purchase, including this 3-month survival kit. You'll get a year-long guarantee, plus free shipping on orders over $97. They're called 4 Patriots. That's the number 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support veterans and their families. Go to 4patriots.com. Use the promo code Carl to get your 10% off today. All right, now, Simon Hankinson of the Heritage Foundation, I really appreciate you coming on, especially on short notice. If you would just give us a quick summary of what you do exactly at the Heritage Foundation, and obviously you're on today to talk about the border crisis, but this Declaration of North America specifically that the media is ignoring.
Good morning, Carl. It's great to be with you. I'm a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. I was a Foreign Service officer with the State Department for 23 years up until earlier last year, where I worked overseas. Half that time I was doing consular work, so visas and American citizen services. And now here at Heritage, I focus on the border, everything to do with immigration, and also a little bit of diplomacy, sort of where it all comes together. And as you mentioned, it's a pretty interesting time to be in that business.
Okay, so this is this bit of news. I happened, actually, a friend of mine sent me a text and it said, "Hey, Carl, have you heard about this Declaration of North America? What transpired last week at this Mexico summit between Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden, and the president of Mexico, Labrador, I believe is his, or Obrador, I'm sorry." And I was like, no, I understand that he went there and he said he wants to make the immigration flow or immigration easier, which was insane to me given the border crisis that we had. But I didn't know about this Declaration of North America. Are you familiar with this, Simon? And can you help explain to the audience exactly what it is, if so?
Well, in June of last year, there was something called the Los Angeles Declaration which went into quite a bit of detail about how the Biden administration was going to try to tackle the immigration problem in the U.S. And it was things like what they call the root causes, throwing a few more billions of dollars at aid projects, trying to develop the economies of Central America, which I don't think is a bad thing. I just don't think it's going to have any immediate short-term results, if any long-term ones. And then most recently, there was a summit in Mexico, the North American Leaders Summit, with Justin Trudeau of Canada, President Biden, and the guy they call AMLO, Manuel Lopez Obrador, who's the president of Mexico. And the three of them, somewhat unbelievably, I heard they weren't able to get around to immigration because time ran out in the formal talks. I don't know, apparently they chatted in the elevator or something, but they did come up with a declaration, as they always do, that was probably written weeks ahead of time by White House staff and State Department people. And they did touch on immigration. Honestly, there's nothing staggeringly new there. Biden is always talking about opening up new legal pathways, which is what he means by I can't get it done through the law because Congress wouldn't pass my massive amnesty bill that I came up with in January of last year. So I'm going to do it through the back door by inventing new programs and by using the parole system to an extent that's never before been used in history.
Simon, it seems to me that if we want to get to the root causes of illegal immigration or migration, it seems to me that the smart thing to do would be to seal our borders first, and then we can figure out all the root causes. And I think the root cause is America is the greatest country that God has ever given man, despite the left's claims that it's not. But I do want to just read just a tad bit from this column that was posted by Larry Kudlow of Fox News, and he talks. The title is "The Biden's Declaration of North America and Immigration Policy Should Be Thrown Away." Some of the things that they're looking to implement has to do with DEI, CRT, diversity, equity, inclusion. The first pillar is, in fact, DEI. That's what they've supposedly committed to. But thank you for telling me AMLO. That's perfect. Now I can just say AMLO. Pretend like I knew all along there, Simon. So you've made me smarter already. All right. So I appreciate that. All right. So AMLO, Justin Trudeau, and Joe Biden. The first pillar is to include diversity, equity, and inclusion. Second pillar, climate change and the environment. Third pillar, competitiveness. And then they came up, I guess, with a fourth pillar that talks about migration and development. But all of this is meant to make immigration easier. I mean, open borders easier, as if we don't have any borders. As a matter of fact here, Simon, as I go on to read the columns, it talks about how we had 2.4 million people come through the United States through our ports of entry last year in 2022, a major uptick from President Trump's last year. But this year, it could get even worse with this mindset that's encompassed in this Declaration of North America.
It absolutely could get worse. I think the figures were 2.7 million total.
Whoa. Okay.
They call them encounters because they don't want to call them what they are. They should be arrests. Like if you illegally cross over at the border, you're supposed to be, under our law, arrested, and you're supposed to be detained. If you then claim asylum or have some other reason to request to remain in the country, that has to go through our courts. And then at the end of it, you are either allowed to stay or you're sent back where you came from. That's the way the system's supposed to work. But under Biden, what they've been doing is just releasing people into the country and saying, well, give us a call when you can, or show up at this court. They call them notices to appear. Show up at this time at this court. It's been a mix of the two. And then there's been another 300,000 at the ports of entry. So that would be a legal entrance point where someone just shows up and says, I claim asylum, I want to stay in the States. So kind of adding those together gets us the 2.7 million. And then on top of that, they've got a million what they call gotaways. So that's people who Customs and Border Protection, Border Patrol are pretty sure, based on cameras, based on sensors, based on other things, drones, they're sure that someone got in, but they have no idea who they are, and they don't know what happened to them after they got into the country. And that's probably where the majority of your bad hombres, as they say, came in.
Okay, so all right, now the numbers that you've reported are just more staggering. I knew about the gotaways. I didn't realize they were upwards of 1 million. only 300,000 are coming to the ports of entry. I got that number completely wrong. I was thinking it was a 2.4 or so million that were coming through the ports of entry, but that's not the case, which in my mind makes the problem even worse.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's 2.4 million off, on the border, but not at a port of entry. It's two different age. You got your border patroller picking them up at the border when they swim over the river, cross over the river, and then you have Customs and Border Protection, their Office of Foreign Operations. Those guys are at the actual port of entry. If you show up in Tijuana, cross over from Tijuana into San Diego, or you cross over from Nogales into Arizona. So, but the overall numbers, the thing to remember, because we can get so lost in the statistics, they're so crazy right now. The overall numbers are the highest they've ever been in U.S. history. And instead of trying to apply resources to seal that border and then talk about the future, this administration has pretty much given up on enforcing the border. They've given up on detaining everybody, and they have decided to parole them in, to find a way to let them into the country, which is what they call, safe, orderly, humane, new legal pathways. The latest of which was these 30,000 a month from Haiti, Cuba, and Nicaragua that Biden announced about 10 days ago.
Yeah, this is, these numbers are just, you're right, we can get lost in the numbers. It's absolutely astounding to me, but the administration is also talking out of both sides of their mouths, Simon, because right here in the United States, Karine Jean-Pierre, Alejandro Mayorkas, they're saying, hey, listen, we're getting this thing under control. We're working to get the numbers down. Meanwhile, Biden goes to this summit in Mexico, and basically he says the complete and utter exact opposite. So they have no intention, just as you've mentioned, to bring down or to stave off the border crisis that we see. And I have to start asking. I have to start wondering, what are their motives? Actually, I don't. I think I know their motives, but I think it is time to start questioning their motives and exactly what they're trying to do by allowing all of this illegal immigration to take place. Do you have a take on that, Simon? I mean, people have heard my take, but I'd like to hear what you think is going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll draw an analogy, a comparison for you of what I think is going on here. The biggest lie, and I hate to use that word, but I think the biggest lie in this administration's PR is that they ever intend to deport anybody. Because if they were to say, look, all right, we got an unprecedented situation. We just want to let everybody be heard. We want to hear what they have to say. If they qualify for asylum, which is going to be under 10% based on historical numbers, we'll let them stay. If they don't have a genuine fear of persecution under our law, then we're sorry, we're going to have to send them back home. They're economic migrants. They can get in line with everybody else. But they simply don't have any intention of deporting anybody. And you can see that from last year's numbers. Mayorkas told ICE, I don't want you to go after just Joe average illegal alien. I want you to go after the criminals and terrorists and the worst kind of people. Don't even bother with the rest. And so we deported 72,000 people last year. It was half of the year before. And if you calculate that, that's basically, it's not even a month's illegal crossers at the border. It would take, 50 years to deport everybody if we started today and not one other person came in. So even though it says in this declaration, I just was reading it, the key deliverables for the North American Leaders Summit, it says that, they're going to be opening up these new pathways, but at the same time, they're going to make sure that migrants with unmeritorious protection claims, meaning they don't pass the asylum bar, are quickly removed. And that's just not going to happen. Now, your question, why? What's in it for them? I've been speculating like you have too, because I worked for the government for 23 years. I'm not party political. I would support any politician that said that they were going to enforce our laws, immigration laws. But look what's happening in our big cities. You've got prosecutors, many of them who got their jobs through a lot of money being paid into their campaign from George Soros and others who ideologically don't believe in punishing criminals.
Right.
And they said, we're not going to prosecute misdemeanors. We're not going to prosecute shoplifting. We're not going to prosecute people driving without license plates or without insurance because they just don't think it should be done. So that's one reason, ideology. I think there's people in this administration running immigration policy who don't believe in borders. They don't believe in nations. They believe in kind of one world. Everybody should go wherever they want to go. Partly because they've probably never been anywhere and they have no idea how desperate some people are to get out of where they are. I think this is cynical, but maybe there's a long-term electoral advantage that they think is there, that if they let in, millions of people who they assume will vote for them, Democrat in this case, then it's in their long-term interest. They can't lose. I'm not sure I buy that. I think we've seen the Hispanic vote in the U.S. turn a little bit to the right recently because their values correspond with conservative values. And so I think those are the two biggest factors. And there's ideology and there's electoral advantage.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with you on both points. And to the latter point, I personally do believe that. Listen, I appreciate the fact that there are a lot of Latinos here in the United States that seem to be that are basically conservatives at heart. Many of them, the same with the Black community, but have voted left or have voted Democrat for quite a long time. But we're seeing this uptick in Latinos that seem to be voting Republican and voting their values. We saw it in Texas, and we're seeing it happen across the country. We see it. We've seen it here in Florida. I mean, big time in the last election for Governor Ron DeSantis. So it's absolutely amazing. But I think what the left is banking on is. Listen, if you have people that come to the country and they're allowed to come into the country illegally and you can disperse them around the country, I do think the goal is to change the demographics. I do believe the goal is to change the culture and to totally just almost abolish American sovereignty and border law as it exists today. And I do hope more of these Latinos, because I don't believe they're going to get deported, although I want to dive into that a little bit. But I think the goal for the Democrat Party, or their hope anyway, is that because these migrants or illegal migrants coming into the country now are not assimilated, they want to keep them, in my opinion, in a lower class, perpetual poverty, and get them hooked on welfare and freebies, minimize or totally dilute the middle class with illegal immigrants, and just have a bigger voting block of people that could not only win in blue states or blue areas or blue strongholds, but ultimately win in red areas when they're dispersed into red America, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I left off one third possibility from the list, and that's extortion. I mean, does the Biden administration think, look, give us the immigration bill we want, or New York gets it, or maybe that's their calculation, is if they flood the borders and the country just loses control, then members of Congress who are a little bit less hardline on this are going to go, well, we got to cut a deal with Biden, we got to give amnesty, we got to do something, otherwise this is going to go on forever. I think it's pretty cynical, and I'm not sure it hasn't backfired, because a lot of Republicans who might have been willing to make a deal, willing to talk, are so disgusted by this unprecedented abandonment of constitutional responsibilities that maybe they're not in the mood to talk right now. On your cultural point, yeah, I find that fascinating. I mean, I've as probably all of us have, who are conservative by, let's say, by heart, if not necessarily by upbringing in history, we've seen this critical theory monster take over academia, take over government, take over companies. And part of it is a real dislike of the United States of America, what makes us exceptional. Our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our freedom of speech, our individualism. There are people who just fundamentally don't like that, and they want to see it brought down. And this is one possible way to do it, one possible tool. If you bring in absolutely unlimited numbers of people, and if you cheapen U.S. citizenship, that's another aspect.
Yes.
I'm an immigrant. I came here as a kid.
No
so
way.
I had to take an oath. I had to say, that was a thing for me. I made a choice, like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. I was born an Englishman. I chose to become an American. Now, I believe in immigration. I don't think there's anyone in this building I work in who thinks that we should just stop all of a sudden. But I believe it should be legal, and I believe U.S. citizenship should have value. People should want to come here, but they should also, there's responsibility. They should attempt to learn our history, learn our culture, learn our language, and be contributing citizens. And that's what most of them do. But in order for you to do that, you have to have control over the flow. You can't have absolutely unlimited numbers of people, or else that system, that assimilation, just doesn't have time to work. And I think you may have a point there.
What's fascinating to me, Simon, is I have a couple of buddies that are business owners and legal immigrants. And it's amazing. They come here. They absolutely appreciate the country. They work hard. They become successful because they recognize that America is the greatest country that God has ever given man. Not because we're better people per se, but we have a better system. The Constitution is just better. And the left is completely trying to destroy that, dilute it at the very least, in my opinion. But I love this idea. You mentioned the extortion factor, and you're right. I wonder if it would have worked before, but now people are so disgusted and people are so outraged that maybe even weak-kneed Republicans, in my opinion, as they tend to be, will actually push back on this. But I do have a question. Do you think the Republicans or the politicians in D.C. have the stomach to send any of these illegal migrants back, or are all of them here to stay, in your opinion?
Wow, I really don't want to tell you what I think because it's too depressing. I don't think that there's much appetite to go after the entire body of illegal aliens in the United States in Congress. I think no one really knows what the number is. We've been saying 11 million for a very long time now, and I just read a report from the 1990s when it was only like 4 million, and they were estimating 300,000 added to that every year. So even if you just do that simple math and you add in the numbers Biden's let in, we've got to be in the teens, if not the 20s, of illegal aliens living here. So what I would like to see is some effort made to seal the border, more than an effort. I'd like to see it done, and then to give those people who are in our system, in our asylum system, because that's the assumption that the Biden administration is making, that they're all genuine asylum claimants making claims. I would like to see those cases heard, sure, put them in line. They should be detained while they're heard, or they should be, better yet, kept outside of the United States. That's why the Remain in Mexico program worked so well.
Right.
And then if they don't have a claim, then you have to send them back, because otherwise the system has no integrity. In the same way that if you don't punish crime, if you let people shoplift and commit misdemeanors that are on the books, but you simply don't enforce the law, then the law has no meaning. And in the past, Democratic presidents, Republican presidents, they all enforced immigration law. The Democrats probably made more attempts to get around it when they needed to. It was the Cubans, the Haitians, there was a crisis in the region. But they enforced the law because they understood that was their constitutional responsibility. And at the very least, I would like to see a return to that, where ICE is allowed to do its job to deport those people who our courts, after fair due process, have deemed have no right to remain in the country.
All right, and again, for those of you tuning in today, I'm speaking to Simon Hankinson. He is with the Heritage Foundation. He's a senior research fellow. He has expertise in border security, or he's at the Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation, and that's where his expertise lies. And when we are talking about this Declaration of North America and what's going on with the border crisis, because obviously the big story obviously is Joe Biden's the classified documents that have been found in Joe Biden's the Penn Biden office, and then in his home next to his garage, and then in an adjacent room. An adjacent room inside of his Delaware personal residence. I mean, that story isn't going anywhere, and I think things are going to get tougher for Biden, even though I don't think this was the right special counsel to pick. Nonetheless, that is the big story. But because of that big story, and because it deserves attention, stories like this are being missed, and we cannot neglect what's happening on the border. And again, this Declaration of North America, when Biden went to Mexico last week, and he sat with AMLO, the president of Mexico, and also with Justin Trudeau, basically they came out with probably a prearranged agreement to essentially make the border crisis worse, in my opinion. So you heard at the beginning of this podcast the numbers that Simon Hankinson mentioned. The numbers are absolutely astounding, and we don't expect that they're going to get better. Simon, I want to touch on I'm not sure. Oh, actually, first, before I move on with this next question, I do want to talk about what's been transpiring in the Keys. I have a couple of friends that actually live in the Keys. They sent me some pictures. They were, maybe you can clarify some of this stuff. They literally sent me pictures. They were out in the ocean and probably about 35 miles out. And they were witnessing, I mean, I've seen some of the pictures on Fox News. They were literally witnessing some boaters, some asylum seekers, I guess you would say, from Cuba, some from Haiti. They saw a couple or a few different boats in the span of a couple of days. And they said, no one's talking about this. And they mentioned the same thing. We've always had migrants coming over, but the numbers are becoming worse. Fort Jefferson is basically at capacity for being able to handle the illegal immigrants that are there. They mentioned that there was a boat that was in distress, and they tried to help the people out. The people refused help. I didn't know this, Simon. The people refused help. They didn't want them to touch them because they were American, and they said if they didn't get to shore, they wouldn't get their asylum. So they asked for water, and they did. Apparently, eventually, the Coast Guard were called. But this is insane. They said they've never seen as many vessels as they're seeing now of people trying to come to America.
Well, what you're describing is chaos. And that's what we have in Florida. That's what we have at the southern border. Because the message has gone out. You will occasionally see Karine Jean-Pierre or Mayorkas or President Biden kind of mumble something about, well, the border's not really open, please don't come. But everybody out there in the rest of the world has WhatsApp and Signal and Facebook, and they're getting real-time information from their friends and relatives who are telling them the exact opposite. The border is wide open. Biden has been paroling in, as I said, over 1 million people, or at least released into the interior with some kind of show up when you can type of situation. And this new program, 30,000 people a month, is on top of the existing Volunteers for Venezuela or whatever it was called. You've got the Ukrainian one, you've got the Afghan one, and then you've got the people showing up at the border. So the message out there is, whatever they say, just show up and it'll work out. It'll get taken care of. In Florida, it's really complicated there because, we had, there was the Mariel boat lift when, I'm not sure how many, it was maybe 80,000 people. So it sounds in today's numbers, not that much, but it was a lot at the time. Brought a whole lot of people all at one time from Cuba. After that, there was the wet foot, dry foot policy was enforced, where if they were caught at sea, then they were sent back. But if they managed to make it to land, then Cubans had a special status, which Haitians didn't have, and yada yada. It was complicated, but it was sort of a mess, if you like, that Floridians. I lived down in Miami for a couple of years. People sort of got used to it. It wasn't great, but it was better than what we have now, which is chaos. And there are no rules, and I think everybody's just rolling the dice and figuring they'll probably win, which at this point they will.
You know what? And it makes total sense because I had forgotten about I forgot it was called that too, the wet foot, dry foot policy. I remember reading about that a long time ago, frankly. But basically, everyone that can make it to our shores, they don't have to be Cuban. They feel like there's a wet foot, dry foot policy. Haitians feel that way because, according to my friends, a boat of Haitians told them the same thing: "Don't touch us, don't touch us." So they believe. So they believe that policy applies to them as well. This is absolutely astounding. I have to ask you about this. This is something that is happening in Europe. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but I suspect you will be. The National Pulse wrote a column entitled "More Migrants Move Over the Great Replacement to Flood Rural Areas with Cheap Labor," and basically what they talk about happening in rural areas of Europe, places like Cornwall and the Isles of, I've never heard of this, Scilly, Scilly. What they're talking about is how migrants are coming to Europe, and what the European government is wanting to do, and this leveling up agenda is what they're calling it, is placing these migrants, illegal migrants, into poor areas instead of making so that I guess the cities or the big metropolitan areas, I don't know what they would call them in Europe, aren't overwhelmed. But these people have to be subjected. They can do all of the laborious labor necessary in these poor areas where mostly poor, impoverished people or elderly people have. And after 5 years of working that type of work, then they can possibly come back to the cities or metropolitan area. But it seems to me we're kind of doing the same thing, except in America, except I believe it's permanent. I believe that the Democrat Party wants a perpetual dependency class, and they have no intention of the people that are coming into the country. They don't want them to achieve the American dream. They want to abolish the American dream, and they just want a voting base that will keep them in power. Am I far off in your opinion? And have you heard about the Europe situation? I'm sorry, that was a long one, but
well, as to the second part, it's a theory. It's kind of out of my lane, so okay. I don't have enough information to challenge it or support it. I have heard it. Now, when you're saying Europe, I think you're talking about the UK, Great Britain.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah. The Scilly Isles and Cornwall. Cornwall's in the west of England. I'm not exactly sure where the Scilly Isles are, but I think it's off the coast, probably in that direction. The UK has its own challenges because what happens is migrants cross over illegally into Europe, into Italy or France, or through Turkey into Greece, and then they work their way up to where they think that there's jobs and they have families and life is easy. So many of them want to go to Germany, they want to go to Sweden, they want to go to places where they can get jobs, where they can live well, get benefits, where their families are. And that for many of them is England. I was born in London a long time ago, and I believe at the time the city was sort of 85%, let's say, native born. It's now about 40%, I think.
Wow.
So there's a stupid great replacement theory that kind of makes the rounds of the crazy internet about financiers funding the replacement of Europeans by you can kind of throw that out the window. But just mathematically, demographically, there has been a change in the makeup of populations in many places. Certainly in the United States, certainly in Europe. I spent 3 years in Marseille. Marseille is one of the largest North African cities in the world because you've had a huge population of people from Algeria, from Tunisia, from parts of the old French Empire showing up. Paris, London, Berlin, all of these European cities, Milan, now have sizable populations from outside of the home country. That's just migration. That's patterns of history that you are going to see over time. What is unprecedented now is the sheer number and sheer pressure and the lack of control.
Sure.
Look, I believe that migration is good. Immigration certainly has been good for the United States. You and I probably come from completely different roots, but we're both Americans. We both believe in the same project. We both believe the United States is a unique and special country. And I think that's how this country was built. It's not built on race. It's not built on shared blood. It's built on shared values, on shared ideas. And when we lose those, then I really worry. If we don't believe in the flag and the national anthem and the Constitution and our history, and we don't believe that the founding fathers created something better than what they found, that our country was better than living under a monarchy, then we're in real trouble. And so I look at these patterns with that kind of long-term lens on.
Sure.
Are we able to make sure that people coming into our country are accepting of that system, accepting of that history, and trying to build a better project? And when we lose control, I think we cheapen our citizenship and we lose control of that policy. That's what's happening in Europe, and that's what's happening in Britain. The asylum system, which was set up, after World War II to make sure that Jews weren't persecuted by Nazis and that people could flee communist regimes that were totalitarian and told them how to live. This was a good system, but it was set up 70 years ago in a world that no longer exists. Now the pressure is not really coming from people fleeing ideology. It's people fleeing bad government, economic disasters, environmental problems, overpopulation, no jobs for young people. That's what's driving the migration into the United States and into Europe. And our asylum system hasn't adapted. It hasn't kept up. And so that's the problem. We're kind of, we're not even putting a Band-Aid on it. We're just getting steamrolled by this crush of humanity without any plan to deal with it.
Yeah, and I have I have another concern. Let me frame it this way. This article goes on in the National Post. They talk about this great replenishment theory rather than the great replacement theory. And whatever people may feel about that, but basically they're saying that the UK needs the workers for whatever reason. I don't know if it's because they're not having babies out there, native people from the UK. I don't know what's going on, but apparently they need the workers. I don't think that's the case in the United States of America per se. With over 300 million people, I've owned two service industries, and I always hear people make the arguments, well, Americans won't do the work that immigrants will do. And I'm like, no, actually, I've owned two service business, which is very hard and laborious work. And I know people that do, and I know people that won't hire illegal immigrants, and I know people that will, frankly. And it's just not true. It's always an issue of pay. But the problem is when it comes to America, it damages small business owners because we're put in a bind where it's like you got to pay buttloads of money, or you're tempted to like, okay, I'm not making as much money. Inflation is high. Do I hire illegals? Now, I would never go that route, but that does become an issue. The United States doesn't necessarily need a flood of immigration. I'm not a fan of we're a nation of immigrants. I'm like, no, people immigrate to America, but we're a nation of citizens, just like every other country around the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem of our age, or the question of our age. And you've got really two different approaches. One is the you've got to grow forever approach,
yeah,
which thinks that, we need younger people to work so they can pay yesterday's Social Security, the aging baby boomer generation. And we just need to keep importing people forever. But if you follow that logic, you never win, right? You never catch up. So look at China right now. They're saying, oh, China's about to face a demographic crisis because they're no longer replacing themselves, and more people died last year in China than were born. Okay, maybe, but they have 1.4 billion people. And
right.
I was in India for a couple years back when they only had, first time I went there, they had 800 million people.
Wow.
And the second time I went, it was more like pushing up to 1 billion. Now they've overtaken China at 1.4 billion people. And I'm telling you, it was too crowded. It's a beautiful country, but the quality of life in an awful lot of it was ruined by the sheer number of people that were sharing the resources, the water, the power, the fields, the rest of it. So look at the Japanese. They have had the same issue. They're an aging population, right? But they have decided that they're not going to do this. They're not going to bring in a large number of younger workers to try to make up for the fact that they're aging. They're doing it in different ways. Maybe they're doing more mechanization. Maybe they're having people work longer in life. And they're compensating because they want to preserve whatever it is that they feel is unique about Japanese culture. I suspect that the Chinese will probably do the same thing, because where are they going to find 100 million new laborers to bring in? Europe and the United States, there are people who are making that argument that we need to bring in younger workers. And I think there's definitely some validity to it. We have 1 million people a year coming in legally. Let's not forget. So it's not like the United States has no...
Right, exactly.
But who do we bring in? Right now we have family unification trumps the point system. We don't have a point system. We don't bring people in because they're young, willing to work, and have skills that we need. We bring some of those, not many. Mostly we bring in parents, brothers and sisters, family members of existing American citizens who, maybe they're younger and great workers, but they could equally well be people who are about to go on Social Security. So it's a conscious choice that countries make about how to manage demographic change. And in my opinion, if you just think that you have to keep bringing in an unlimited supply of labor in order to compensate for your aging population, it's a Ponzi scheme, and you're never going to win. Eventually, you're going to run out, and you're going to face the payday, and you're going to have to make some tough choices. Well, why not make those tough choices today rather than kick it down the road 10, 20, 30 years?
And you bring up such a great point in basically a merit-based immigration system. And honestly, I think that's what we need to go to. And I'm a softie at times here, Simon. Like I feel bad for people's plight. outside of the United States of America, oftentimes, especially in these countries where tyrants, reign over them. But still, I sit there and I'm thinking we just can't bring in everybody. It isn't physically, it's not possible. And beyond that, I mean, with over 300 million people, 330 million people, a population of estimates, or thereabouts. I'm like, can't we just tell people to stop aborting their babies and have babies if we are worried about young people? And in our college system, instead of making the college systems woke and divisive, where they teach, DEI, CRT, all this kind of stuff, can't we just get back to STEM? I mean, this makes more sense to me.
I totally agree with the last thing you said. I mean, I was looking at the National Assessment of Educational Achievement, whatever, the NAEC, Nations Report Card they call it. And the numbers are really horrific. You've got big cities in the U.S. where 10% of the kids can read and write and do math. We're spending, Washington, D.C., right here behind me, is spending the most amount of money per pupil of any school district in the country, except for, I think, New York City. And our results are abysmal. And it's not because the kids are stupid. It's not because they can't learn. It's because the system, the schools have failed them. There's no discipline in the classes. They're not putting in the content that they need. I sent my kids to DC public schools. I've seen some of this firsthand. And this is true of state after state and school system after school system. Right now, the teachers union is prioritizing, like you said, race, gender, things that younger children just simply don't need to be spending too much time on, versus history, math, science, English, things that will get them employed later on in life and make them functioning American citizens. How you stop that? It seems like the rut is pretty deep. I have to say, personally, I'm a big fan of your governor down in Ron DeSantis. I mean, I think what he's done has been really constructive. He has taken on the lobby that tries to run all of this stuff, sort of roughshod over standards. He said, no, I don't want universities to be woke to the point where they're not teaching kids how to think, where they're shoving an ideology down their throats. The what's it called, Parents' Rights and Education Bill, where he said certain things don't belong in third grade. That's just insanity. These kids should be learning the basics. There's hope. But a lot of people are arguing that they're going to pull their kids out and put them in private schools, charter schools. I think nationally we've seen numbers of enrollments in public school go way down the last year or two. And it's partly parents who are responding to the crisis that you just spoke about.
Is Ron DeSantis? I mean, I love this guy. Sometimes I'm like, is he just too good to be true? Is he what's the term? They're pulling the wool over our eyes. And then I read another column of something he's got going on. I'm like, God Almighty, this guy. He knows where to fight and how to fight, which is amazing. I mean, even what he's doing with Disney. He came out the other day. This is off topic, but he came out the other day and he was debating on whether or not to return or give this new power, if you will, to kind of look over Disney World down here to Orange County. I live in Orange County, Florida. Orange County, Florida is gone to hell with gasoline draws on Simon. The mayor, Mayor Demings here. I mean, he is so far left. And this guy used to be a sheriff, but you can go to downtown Orlando. The streets are dirtier. The homelessness has exploded down here. And this, you can go to, I can go literally right down the road in the Seminole County. It's like a different world. You go to Orlando, downtown Orlando, parts of Orange County. It looks worse than it's looked, in my opinion, since I've got here. I moved here in '93, moved back to LA for a while, and came back. But the city is horrific. And these people were talking about, listen, if we take over control of Disney in Orange County, we're going to have to tax Orange County residents. And Governor DeSantis says, no, you're not going to punish your citizens. So instead of you taking over, we're just going to create a state board. Let Disney, who makes gazillions of dollars every day, pay their own costs. For God's sakes. It's insane. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's my rant for this episode here, Simon.
No, look, I came back from, I've served in India, 3 times in Africa. You would not go to a downtown African city around the president's house or the parliament and see what I see every day driving back and forth in Washington. There's 30, 40 people waiting near a bridge that I have to drive through every day. All of these people clearly need help. They need help they have drug addictions, they have social problems, mental health problems, and they're not getting that help in a city that has an unbelievable richness of federal funds that way exceeds the income of the people who live in it. It's just mismanagement. I mean, San Francisco, you talked about LA. I mean, I've seen pictures of streets in San Francisco, in LA, and Portland, where there are literally thousands of people camped out on the streets in tents. It's an open air drug market. And these are conscious choices made by the people who run those cities. I think it's really sad. I think it sends a terrible message, but I guess what it does is tells people that, there are consequences to your policies. You can try them out, do a social experiment, see what happens when you don't force people to get mental health treatment when they're clearly a danger to themselves and others. They push people on subways, people die. If you don't enforce the law against shoplifting, against defecating on the street, against shooting drugs up on the street, you will end up with Portland. And for the people who are paying the taxes, I don't know where your franchise is, where your business is, but small business owners are the ones who have to eat the consequences, because not only are they paying taxes for services they're not getting, like police and clean streets, but their customers aren't going to show up because they're too scared.
Yeah, it's it's absolutely insane, and I honestly, the homeless crisis that has been exacerbated because of the open borders, places like El Paso that the local authorities conveniently cleaned up before Biden's trip there. It's insane. I really feel like what we're doing on the borders, in my opinion, anyway, is evil, because I don't believe that the Biden administration has any intention of bringing these people in. I don't think they want them to pursue the American dream. I think they want them to be permanently dependent. And if that means camping out on the street, they really don't care. They believe that these people will vote for them because these people will become totally dependent upon them. So it's really a sad state of affairs. That's just my opinion. Again, Simon, I just have one more question for you before we get out of here. And again, I'm speaking to Simon Hankinson. He's a senior research fellow. His expertise is the border security and immigration at the Heritage Foundation. I just started scrolling through some of your columns. You talk about the 6 biggest lies from Mayorkas and DHS about Team Biden's post-Title 42 plans. Listen, obviously we don't have the time, and I'm throwing this at you right now, but I saw that headline and I was like, oh, I wish I would have read that column. What are some of the things that you can tell us about Mayorkas' lies when it comes to Title 42?
Well, I'm going to cheat and pull up my note card here because it's a while since I wrote that, and there's been many lies since.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I know I threw a curveball at you here. I can just mention some of the key takeaways that's listed here at Heritage. If anyone wants chaos, it's the Biden administration, which is using it to extort money and radical concessions from Congress. You've actually already mentioned that, so that is a great point. Or do you have it pulled up, or?
Yeah.
Go right ahead then.
Definitely one. I mean, number one, they say it's Congress's fault. Congress didn't pass my law, so I'm going to take my ball and go home. Take my wall and go home, and then everybody can walk in. You can't play politics that way. Of course, Congress wasn't going to pass Biden's immigration bill, which is essentially going to amnesty millions of people, open the door for millions more, and it was going to provide no effective security. So that's number one. They say it was broken when we found it, this immigration system. They keep talking about how we inherited a broken immigration system. Right. Under Trump, numbers of arrests to the border were down 85%, getting towards the end of his term. They enforced this Remain in Mexico program. They used Title 42 when COVID came out. They detained people when they crossed illegally. They still allowed them to apply for asylum, but they got control over the border. So was it perfect? No, but it certainly wasn't broken when Biden inherited it. They broke it. Then third, they say that their policy is safe, orderly, and humane. It's not safe. I think over 1,000 people have been found dead trying to cross into the United States illegally. that doesn't sound particularly safe to me. It's certainly not safe for the hundreds of thousands of Americans with drug problems, and I think 65,000, 67,000 that died of drug overdoses from opioids, mostly fentanyl, which is all coming over the border. I don't think it's humane either. Like you said, there's people living in in the streets who are then passed on to social services in New York and Chicago and other cities that already can't look after their own people. And by encouraging people to come, you're setting up an inhumane process where they're having to cross through dangerous countries, the Darien Gap, and so on, and more people are going to die. And number four, the administration likes to pretend that it's all these world trends. It's not anything the U.S. has done. It's this unprecedented coup here. Anyone who studied history for 5 minutes knows that this is nothing new. If you go back to 1945 and you look at Latin American history, you're going to find, or African history, Asian history, there are coups, there are earthquakes, there are problems. There are always reasons for people to go. Is it worse now than it was 10 years ago? I don't think you can say it is. And then they say there's nothing they can do about it. And that's not true. They've already got like I said, the tools of Title 42, the migrant protection protocols. They can make asylum cooperative agreements with other countries, like in Central America, where they say if people pass through your country, which is a safe country, from their country, which supposedly isn't, then they can't then go and claim asylum 2 countries down the line. We can send them back there and then claim asylum in Guatemala. Just like in Kenya, there were people from Somalia who were at some point trying to get into the refugee system. They didn't get to go to Europe and then try to get into the refugee system. They had to do it from the first safe country that they got to, which was Kenya. And lastly, and this is the biggest lie, and I think I mentioned this earlier on in our talk, is that there are going to be clear consequences for people who break the law. If you don't get asylum, we want to give everybody a chance, a legal pathway, a safe system, an orderly, humane. Who could be against that, right? It sounds fair. But we know that most of these people are economic migrants. I don't blame them for trying. I'd do the same thing if I were them. I've lived in a lot of the countries they come from. They're not bad people. There's a small percentage that are, but most of them are just trying to get a job, trying to get ahead. But there might be people who want to live in my house because it's more comfortable than where they live in America. But that doesn't mean I'm going to invite them and let them all live in my house because I pay the rent. I don't have that much room. So we have a system. It is lawful. And it has to be enforced, even if that means making some tough choices. And they're not willing to make those tough choices. They're not willing to have any consequences for people who come in illegally, even if they fail in their asylum claims. They're just going to let them hang on in limbo forever until either another government gets elected or they can amnesty them in the future.
Well, I guess the bad news is we're screwed for at least a couple of more years, and actually probably we don't know the long-term effects of this open border crisis that Biden is allowing to occur at our southern border. The good news is we do have solutions, because we know that regardless of how you may feel about former President Donald Trump, he brought about in his administration some really good solutions to curb the border crisis. I think it's last year in office. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Simon, but we were looking at maybe 40,000 people entering the border monthly, as compared to Biden, who's well over 200,000 and near, if I'm not mistaken, 250,000 people entering monthly.
That sounds about right. It goes up and down, but it's been above 150,000 for all of Biden's administration, and the Trump numbers were way lower, like you said, in the 40,000 range.
Oh man! All right, so we got some work to do, but sadly, we do have to report the truth, and the truth is the immigration crisis isn't getting any better underneath the Biden administration. I'm sure Simon. You write about, obviously you did in that column, the solutions using some of those Trump policies. So make sure you guys follow him. Check him out at the Heritage Foundation. Are there other places where people should find you or go to look for you, Simon, and your work?
I always post my articles on Twitter. I'm WatchfulWaiter1, and heritage.org. If you search under my name or search under immigration, there's a whole lot of good content up there.
You said Watchful Waiter 1?
Yes, sir.
The number 1 or spelled out?
Number 1.
Okay. All right. I'll check you out there. I appreciate that. All right, and I hope you guys do too. Listen, guys, I do appreciate you tuning in to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Please, again, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. You go to YouTube, you go to Rumble. Please like, rate, and review. That'll help us boost our numbers. That'll help us get more attention. And that's the name of the game in this business. We're all fighting together to try to save, or in what I say, to try to restore American constitutionalism, because I hate to tell you, I think we live in a post-constitutional America, but that's just me. But again, I appreciate you tuning in. Please follow me on social media. The Carl Jackson Show is where you can find me. Don't forget our sponsors. Listen, guys, the only way we can keep rolling is if you support our sponsors, and we've got great ones. 4patriots.com, the number 4. Again, if you purchase anything up to $97, you'll get 10% off. All you have to do is use the promo code Carl. And listen, I live in Florida. We have hurricanes. I'm somewhat of a prepper. I'm not going to lie to you. All right. I like to be prepared. I like to be prepared with short-term food, but God knows what can happen. Things go completely chaotic and haywire. You want a long-term supply of food. ForPatriot.com is where you can find it. And don't forget MyPillow.com. MyPillow.com. Take advantage of deals up to 66% off. All you do is use the promo code Carl. You can go to MyPillow.com or 1-800-858-0263. Simon Hankinson, I appreciate you joining us so much today, enlightening us, and we'll be sure to follow you on social media. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carl. Anytime.
All right.